morning on the Parrot through RRR, and the time is a couple of minutes past the hour of 12 o'clock. And good morning, Kitty.
Good morning, Bob.
And Kate's still away. She's busily preparing up for her St Kilda trip, which I'm sure you've heard about, her St Kilda benefit for the people down there. And so we'll give you details. Actually, that's happening real soon, I think. We'll see if we can get some details before the end of the show as to what's going on in that line. And so she'll be back hopefully next week. And Kitty, notes in the news today, we've got a packed show. This is going to be hard. Peter Proust from the ACF to talk about kangaroos, which is going to be good. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Bob.
Good morning. You're going to have to get a bit closer to that sort of black foam thing in front of you. Known to some people as a microphone. Anyway, we've got maybe New South Wales Minister for Agriculture to talk, and we've definitely got Peter to talk about kangaroos and kangaroo farming. An interesting debate, and one where I suppose the Parrot differs from the ACF, but we're going to hunt for common ground today and just see what can come out, and it looks good. 1:30, Steve Robbins talking about the rabbit and the rabbit plague, and changes need to be made to myxomatosis. Rabbits, of course, are a real bad pest. Other bits and pieces floating around. Well, lots has happened this week. I suppose the first is an obituary notice to Stephen Murray Smith. Stephen Murray Smith is someone maybe known to some of you. He's done tons and tons of work in Bass Strait and on the history of Bass Strait and on the people of Bass Strait. He used to stay out in Erith Island every year and has given me permission to stay out there a couple of times in the middle of the Straits. He was an excellent old dude. I suppose the best way I remember him is that the people of Port Welshpool used to go down and visit him, and he'd have the tinnies under the arm and he'd go house to house and say good day to everyone, and got on really well with all kinds of crew, you know, and always, like having, when you first met him, he'd remember and always got an invitation to any book opening or anything like that for myself and for the fishermen, and he learned a lot from fishermen, and he spoke a lot to fishermen, and he just had a really good touch, and he's a really good historian, and his history is history that you can have faith in, which is saying something these days with a lot of the stuff that's written. So condolences to Steve Murray Smith's family, daughters and sons and wife, of course, and he'll be very, very sadly missed but never forgotten. And I suppose an obituary to a bit of Queensland rainforest too, as they announced quickly on the air this morning, no doubt you'll see in the papers tomorrow, that Queensland wants a pulp mill, but we'll just let them go at that. Of course they want a pulp mill. Kitty, bits and pieces.
Right, there's a lot of news this week dealing with the timber industry. Not surprising, I suppose, since the Labor Party, the government's going to have to make a decision on that soon enough. First of all, there was a letter to the Age from Roger Smith. Its headline goes, "Timber industry waste of high-quality timber is appalling." Now, we've heard a lot about the waste that does go on in the timber industry, but it seems to sort of fall on deaf ears. Roger Smith is a builder and in fact uses timber. He describes himself as one who spent 17 years dealing with the timber industry as an end user. He's constantly reminded of its appalling waste of high-quality timber and its frustrating inflexibility in the marketplace. During the past 25 years, the timber industry has had access to and clear-felled huge areas of publicly owned virgin native forest. The dollar added value and employment resulting from this monstrous onslaught has been less than 20% of its potential, had the industry broadened its research and developed and entrepreneurial horizons.
Entrepreneurial, Kit.
Well, you know, vitamin. I'm sure people understand what I'm talking about there. The export of over 50 million tonnes of raw, unprocessed eucalypt wood chips since 1968 is a horrific example of a wasted opportunity. And this is in relation to Senator Cook's forestry accord.
Don't trust Cook. Don't cook with Cook. You got a letter reply to some comments too this week, Kitty, from Stephen Guest,
who was a guest here in the studio a couple of weeks ago, which proved to be quite an interesting little...
entertaining.
Very. Right, some people may recall that there was an ad in the Weekend Australia about 3 or 4 weeks ago, which dealt with the Helsham, or it sort of alluded to the Helsham inquiry, and it went along the lines that a lot of academics and people in high places in biology departments and conservation, forests and land felt that we should be able to mix conservation with forestry. And we dealt with that ad on the program here. And what I got from Stephen Guest was he's transcribed parts of that notes on the news.
They get transcribed for us, which we'd like to thank the transcribing services, as you're writing this down, for transcribing the parrot and sending it out to all the bureaucrats and sundries and people we may mention. Thank you very much. It'll cost us a fortune to do the same.
Right, Stephen Guest picked up on 3 points. I made the point that no one, as far as I know, not the ACF, the Australian Conservation Foundation, the Wilderness Society, or witnesses at the Helsham inquiry have denied that conservation and forestry can go together. Now, Stephen Guest wrote to us saying, "Fair go, Kitty. It is an article of faith with the ACF that they can't go together. They say logging destroys forests, and this belief is enshrined in their policy statement number 36, which is in forestry in Australia. This policy is absolutely explicit about their incompatibility. It says there shall be no harvesting of any native hardwood forests. Is that a balance between utilisation and conservation, or is that a total hands-off policy? Incidentally, the ACF policy also says there should be no monocultural plantations, not softwood, not hardwood." Stephen Guest makes 2 comments here. Firstly, he accepts that a monocultural plantation will be less biologically diverse than a mixed species plantation, but he argues that to replace a monoculture of exotic pasture grasses with a monoculture of trees, while not exactly creating an ideal world, is a big improvement. Secondly, it's been established that either monocultural hardwood plantations or mixed species plantations, hard or soft, I wish someone would oil that door, can be made profitable. In other words, I'll just repeat that. Secondly, it has been established that either monocultural hardwood plantations or mixed species plantations can be made profitable. Okay, I can hear your objection from here. This is addressed to me. No one's tried. Stephen then goes on about the profit motive and that how our world is basically run on the notion of profit. We can go into a big, long argument about that, but I don't think I'll bother. What I've done, there's 2 other points, but I'll just follow through on this one. I rang up the ACF and the Wilderness Society to ask them, do they deny that conservation and forestry can go together? And, of course, what they said is, yes, they can go together. What they say is that logging should get out of native forests and should be based on reforestation of derelict land. In other words, they're talking about plantations.
So they don't particularly, but he was right to pick you up on one point, that they don't want to see forestry operations in existing state forested areas. They only want to see them go together in plantations.
Right. However, when it came to, like Stephen's saying here, that the ACF policy says there should be no monocultural plantations. Now, what was said to me yesterday is that they do feel that you can have a monoculture, a plantation or tree farm, but not to replace a native forest, that monoculture should not be regenerated in a native forest that has been logged. A monoculture or tree farm is fine if it's done on reforested derelict land that's been out of production.
Yeah, look, I'm not even really happy with that. This idea of plantation forestry is tasting sourer and sourer. But we have to move on, and it's good that we've answered, that we're getting letters from Stephen Guest. It's good that we can answer them. It's good that we can admit sometimes also that we are wrong too, not being absolutely impervious, even if in this case, Kitty, it was a partial wrongness.
Well, see, the thing is that that is an ad that's in a paper, and a lot of people are going to read that, and a lot of people aren't going to know about the whole argument behind it. So It's very easy to misconstrue what's being said in those ads.
Right. Yes, it is indeed. And also, too, I wouldn't mind having the money to get press like that, of being able to whack in an ad. Oh, there's another one in today. We were going to not mention it, but we weren't going to, they're just, forest industry seems to we're just whacking ads hand over fist. All right, a couple of other bits and pieces are coming up in the show a little bit later on. Roger Jones is coming on 12:30. Also Tony Brindley, and just a note now about the demonstration last week in the city square for Greens Bush. Mind-blowing. I think it's the only way to describe it. Some 500 people turned up. It was the most constructive atmosphere, the most incredible diversity of age groups of people, a lot of really young people, which was really good to see, young teenagers, people in their 20s, university students and so on, then up into the middle-age bracket of crew, and then elderly citizens, and I didn't realise we had parrot listeners. Well, actually I have had a hint. I've had a few ring me up in their 80s, which is fantastic. And everyone was really good. The speakers were just fantastic. John McCready spoke for the Peninsula Conservation Group, and he said something that really made us think. really made us think, and that was in regard to the state Labor government. And he said that we can't be scared of getting rid of the state Labor government, and then he put it even better, who's scared of Jeff Kennett? And I suppose that'd be a really good slogan if the Labor government didn't come up really well, cane out who's scared of Kennett, because I suppose as you start to think, we always have to operate with whichever government's in power, and neither of them are particularly good. And who is scared of Jeff Kennett? I don't know.
That's why it's important to have demonstrations like that.
That's
so that
right.
people can show what they feel.
Well, it was even better because the demonstration went to the Conservation Council of Victoria offices en masse because they sort of dropped Greens Bush, and they picked it up again rather quickly. And Chris Mitchell, to his credit, jumped and said, righto, I'll go with you. He just didn't hesitate. He came straight across. Where are we going? Conservation Forest Lands, no worries. And that was great. On foot, 3 kilometres, and was embraced as a brother because, of course, in this, we want everyone to come together. That's the idea, If there are diversities of views in natural history, recognise them, acknowledge them, and iron the buggers out. And that worked great. And Chris came with us and went in with a delegation in to see Don Saunders and Ian Weir, and he and Hans Brunner, an ex-worker for Conservation Forest Lands, who you'll hear on the show later, and Tony Brindley all went in. Now, we hope to pull Tony up very quickly on the phone. In a couple of minutes, we'll go into a track. But before we do that, too, something else that you can call us about. Lots of people want to go down and have a look at Greens Bush. The most energy efficient and cheapest way of doing it is by bus, big bus. And what we thought we'd do is put together a bus trip down there where we not only look at the wetlands and the area in controversy, but also the rest of Nepean State Park, from the top of the wetlands right through to look at the lower catchment, to look at Highfield, and then to go down and have a look at Cape Schenck and Bushrangers Bay and finish off with a barbie in the afternoon. You bring your own tucker and we'll just supply the bus, and we think we can do it for about $20 a head, which is pretty good for a whole day down to the peninsula and back, and that's going to be in about 3 weeks' time. So if you're interested in that, in 3 weekends' time, it'll be on a Saturday or a Sunday. If you're interested in that trip, give us a ring now, 419-2066. Mick Varney will pick up your calls. The phenomenal, waiting out there, hand in air, big grin on face, dashing for the phone, and that'll be really good, and we'll see how many crew can get down there. Okay, into a track, and this one is one I recognise from my youth, The Birds. And you're on Triple R, the Eclectic Parrot, 17 minutes past the hour of 12 o'clock. Well, as we just said before, there was a demonstration, a successful, peaceful demonstration in the city that marched from the CCV with Chris Mitchell in tow and lots of other people, Joel Wright from the Crew Connection and so on. And we went in and sent a delegation in to see people in Conservation Forest and Lands. Tony Brindley, you're on air. You were the part of that delegation. And what went on when you met with, and what was the agreement that was reached?
Well, I think it was very positive, Bob. I was most impressed. There was some 2 hours after we walked in, we sort of walked out. I think there were some really positive steps to look forward to for a change with the issue after the 2 years that we've battled on. Basically, we were speaking to the Director, Don Saunders, and Deputy Director, Ian Weir, and there was Hans Brunner, myself, and Chris Mitchell from the CCV, and it was agreed that firstly the issue was far from over, the Greens Bush issue. Secondly, that we should be looking to not purchase individual blocks from the Green family. We should be looking to purchase the entire area, all that remains there, as it is of vital importance. And the interesting point there, Bob, was that, which was great, that no one disputed the value, the ecological significance and value of the area. There was no headaches in that department. It was all green lights. It was agreed that any controversy about right and wrong land should be, any problems in that regard should be forgotten, and it's all unison and everybody cooperate, and that the CCV should assist the various conservation groups from down on the peninsula and in Melbourne to combine and assist Joan Kerner and the CFNL department to put sufficient pressure on Senator Graham Richardson to enhance or to enable the sufficient funds to come about to do this whole purchase.
So it's a bit like the embracing of the CCV, that once that CFNL have agreed now that we need to buy the whole lot, and what they're really asking for is for to lay off them and to join with them to put joint pressure on Senator Richardson towards both, so that's both the state CFNL and all the conservation groups and lobbies to all push and pressure Senator Richardson in this election year with their large federal budget surplus to come up for the money for Greens Bush. Is that about right, Tony?
sums it up. And I think it was, it was, as I said, it was really forthcoming, and everybody was agreeable that that's the direction we should take. Now, it was also agreed that we have a meeting with Joan Kerner, Chris Mitchell, myself, and obviously the director and so on, and with regards to further methods of obtaining this result, we are still waiting with bated breath for acknowledgement of same, and I think once that meeting takes place, we can probably report back with some more positive actions to take place, and something that I'm pushing down this end of the world, Bob, is that we should look toward running a very large rally this next time, and I mean a large one with some thousands, and I believe it's a numbers game, because Mrs. Kerner hasn't got the funds. The Victorian government appears not to have, well, certainly CFNL has not got the funds to go ahead and do any more for us. Therefore, we just have to help assist them to impress the federal government that the need is of dire importance, and that
Oh, well, they have to help assist us. All right, well, look, that should be good anyway, and as we say, I think everyone's quite happy to work with any department, regardless of whatever it is, if everyone's trying to be professional in this. If we've come to a common ground arrangement, I think everyone should work in that line, and certainly I think it'd be worth many, many votes to both the federal and state Labor governments to take action on this, and very much like a Bajolke-Peterson reaction, like even Joe used to back down when the numbers were up, and I think in this case it's not so much a back down, but a good compromise move on all sides. Thanks for that, Tony, and we'll keep in touch with you, and of course and we'll have a bit of a bus trip, so we might see you down there in 3 or 4 weeks. So.
Yeah, thanks, Bob.
Okay, mate. And that was Tony Brindley from Peninsula Tree Preservation Group, and so that sounds good. We also have some things coming up in positive lines, and a really good positive show today. Vincent Saventi, and you might remember when Ken Colbung spoke of naturalists and Kuris and Noongas and various other Aboriginal groups working together. He mentioned Vincent Saventi as being the guru of conservation in his view, and from an elder of Western Australian Noongas, that was quite a compliment. Well, Vincent Saventi is talking, and he is, in my view too, you might remember from Nature Walkabout days, he's talking at the Nunawading Arts Centre, and the speech will be a web of greenways through Victoria. Now, Vincent has got some excellent ideas on greenways across Australia to connect up our isolated patches of bush through volunteer plantings, roadside plantings and revegetation of creeks and streams. It fits very closely to the Mullum Creek ideals and very closely to Merri Creek ideals, which we'll be talking about in a couple of minutes with Dave Taylor. Now, this talk is on, unfortunately, at 2 p.m, but look, it's worth taking time off work for. It really is. Monday the 8th of August at the Nunawading Arts Centre, and it should be fantastic. Admission is free, all are welcome, and if you can possibly get down there, make the biggest effort. I'll certainly be there, and I know lots of other people will. We're really keen to hear him speak. He's an excellent speaker and a naturalist of the most impeccable qualifications through effort that he's made over the years to inform Australian people about natural history. And so he'll be well worth seeing. That I'll go through that again. It's Nunawading Arts Centre at 379 Whitehorse Road, Nunawading, Melways 48G9. It's on Monday the 8th of August, 2 p.m, and admission is free, all are welcome. So put that one aside and we might give it a mention a little bit later on. And now I'd like to welcome in the studio Dave Taylor. Good morning, Dave, or afternoon.
Afternoon, Bob.
And David, speaking about corridors and things, the Merri Creek, I went for a walk there Sunday, and with Murray from the nursery, and we went along and had a look at some of the older reveg. You told me this morning revegetation that was done 6-7 years ago, and even though a lot's been learnt since then, and some of the species used perhaps wouldn't be used now, and some of the ways of planting them out wouldn't be used, the area is functioning as the most incredible corridor. In the evening there were scarlet robins with, the lovely white cap and the red breast, and all these amazing birds everywhere, and yellow-rumped thornbills, striated thornbills, white-plumed honeyeaters, and they were pouring sort of up the creek and heading towards the outer Merri areas. Rather fantastic. David, the Merri Creek so far, it's been a piecemeal job of revegetation, but in the Melbourne Times this week, front cover, there's a super plan. Would you like to tell us a bit about it and how it came about?
Yeah, sure, Bob. Well, for a number of years now, the Merri Creek Coordinating Committee's been pushing for proper management of the creek in the long term. And
For those listeners that don't know, the Merri Creek is a tributary of the Yarra River, isn't it?
yeah, it runs into the Yarra at Dights Falls. And yeah, as I was saying, the Merri Creek Coordinating Committee's been pushing for proper management of the creek and consistent funding from the Board of Works and from the local councils to contribute to that proper management of the creek. And towards that end, we've got a consultant study done on future management arrangements for the creek. That's a 6-month consultant study that's just been released. And that consultant study is recommending that the Board of Works and the state government share half the cost of funding a proper management structure for the creek, and the local councils share the remaining 50%.
Right, now, when you pulled this together, what kind of councils are we looking at? Would you like to give us a bit of a lay as to where the creek flows to and from?
Yeah, well, from Dights Falls it flows up through Collingwood.
Backwards, does it?
I was saying we started that in, Bob.
Yep.
It goes through Fitzroy and Northcote, Brunswick, into Preston and Coburg, and out to Broadmeadows and up into the foothills around Wallen, where it originates.
Right, now, in the restoration, what so far that we interviewed Pat Shaw, who a few weeks ago, who's done an excellent job on that area where they've been working near Arthurton Road. Now, restorations have sort of been a bit piecemeal, and the funding, a lot of it's been bicentennial funding, of course, which will fade out. How are you going to ensure that we've got the money in the future for a continuous program? What have you designed up here?
Well, this is what the consultants' recommendations put up, Bob. As I was saying, it recommends a sharing of future funding between the councils and MMBW state government. And at this stage, we're very confident that the councils will come on side and support the proposal as recommended in the report, and that the Board of Works and the state government will also contribute. Already we've got a commitment of 25% of the funding from the Board of Works. So, in effect, if all the councils come through with their side of the funding, we're only a quarter of the funds still to find, and we're confident in the run-up to the state election that the state government will find the remainder of those funds and use it as an election plus for them.
Right, well, there's a lot of potential election pluses around for them at the moment, and certainly hope they go on to this one. I suppose the most exciting thing about this scheme is it sets a really good precedent of management of waterways throughout urban areas and maybe even for rural areas, David.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it will sort of open up the whole area of considering how we manage our urban waterways. The Merri Creek Coordinating Committee has been around since '76. It's got a long history of pushing the Board of Works and the state government for effective management of the creek, and this report's really a first in urban Melbourne for recommending how we should manage our urban waterways. So it will probably serve as something of a pioneering study of proper management of our creeks.
Right, now, when putting this together, the consultants' report seemed to have been a really crucial step in get everyone to agree to have a consultants' report and to see them virtually as the umpires, I suppose, in deciding how the whole thing should go about.
Yeah, well, I think there was a good reservoir of support for moving in this direction, and certainly the councils, through some of their senior officers, participated in the study steering committee, and the Board of Works have been a member of the Merri Creek Coordinating Committee, particularly over the last couple of years since their involvement in the bicentennial program. So, you know, all of these players have been involved in this study, so it's really an outcome of a sort of general direction that people were already moving in.
Right, okay, well, and also it's a good clue, isn't it? Because if people get involved right from the ground up, then we don't have very much in the way of objection, and everybody knows what we're getting in the long run. I see you pulling apart a brochure here, and this brochure, what?
Yeah, we're producing a leaflet on that we're going to distribute to interested people and inner suburban residents, briefly sort of summarising what's in this consultant's report, and it spells out the benefits for local councils and the local community. And it's also, there's a section in that leaflet that asks people to support the consultant's report's recommendations, ring up their local councillors, and write off to Kane and to Frank Wilkes, who's the Minister for Water Resources, who has responsibility over the Board of Works, and urge them to support it through properly funding the arrangements.
Right, and I think that's something that, you know, often listeners ring. I think when we did talk back last week, somebody rang up and said, what can I do? And I suppose the most common question you receive at home on the phone and so on. Well, in this particular case, it's something good. If you live in any of those areas particularly, even if you don't, if you live in an area anywhere in Victoria, you're affected by this precedent in management, write to Frank Wilkes supporting this report. Try to get hold of it. Where can people see the management report and get hold of these brochures, David?
Well, if people would like to perhaps ring after the show and leave a message with Mick, or write to me at Post Office Box 7 Northcote, requesting one of these leaflets, I can send them a copy.
All right, Post Office Box 7 Northcote, David Taylor, and or ring us, of course, after the show on 419-2066. So that sounds good. David, great. I don't know what you say at this stage. I suppose it's congratulations for a bit of long-term work. I know there's been literally years of work gone into building up of this, and it's set a precedent. Maybe next time we get into management area, where it won't take years. It'll be seen as a sort of carte blanche, as a really good way to operate. And it's so good to see so many councils and bureaucracies. The Board of Works really is a startling case of reform, isn't it? It's an amazing, years ago they were the sort of one of the feared bureaucracies for what they used to do to creeks and streams, but they've shown such incredible flexibility in the Melbourne region anyway. So much good initiatives in natural history education, good news, and certainly the Merri Creek Revegetation is good news.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
All right, mate. We're going to go into a track. I'm going to come back for a brief weekly catch-up with Roger Jones and then Peter Pruce from the ACF to talk about kangaroos. Which track are we going to go into, Uncle Bob? This one.
Our newspaper, which was pretty scathing about the way that we'd developed Australia and the attitudes that we'd had while we were developing it. And I think the three words he used were exploitation, ignorance and greed. He went on to say that we were about the most urbanised country in the world, which is true, and for the amount of population that we were harbouring, we'd managed to destroy a hell of a lot of land. Now, of course, all we had to do is sit back and wait for the reaction from that. We got it from the National Farmers Federation as one group, and a few other groups got very head up about these statements. It's the old attitude of not being able to handle someone else's criticism, no matter how qualified they are. And I think what they did in this case was to take his comments without reference to the other things that he's been saying, for well over 10 years. He understands, of course, the exploitation of various cultures and various peoples because, of course, he was Japanese in Canada during the Second World War, and he looks at the situation where we've taken over the land from one management practice, which, of course, is Aboriginal, turned it to another one, which is European, and which hasn't sort of used the land surface at all. It's abused it, if anything, and he's merely made comments along those lines. Of course, everyone got quite upset about it. From my point of view up here, trying to encourage people's awareness of salinity and soil degradation, I can only agree with his comments, and I can't understand why everyone's got so upset.
Yes, well, I suppose nobody likes to be pointed out they're wrong, and particularly from someone who they recognise as being a foreigner. It's a funny, sort of strange reverse cultural cringe, isn't it, Roger? In the last couple of weeks, we've had the Timber Industry Council coming out and slamming David Bellamy indirectly, saying that he was a foreigner and no right to say. And I think Stephen Guest, when we had him on, really wanted to hoe into Bellamy for supporting a fruit industry that cleared a whole lot of land that led to salinity and blah, blah, blah. But, and yet, when we go to the Helsham inquiry, that astounding contradiction where our botanists and our biologists weren't good enough for Helsham, and he wanted to see international people. It's a strange dichotomy, isn't it?
Well, that's the thing, and I think it was Stephen Guest actually had a go at Yehudi Menuhin as well for talking about the forest. He said something when he was over here playing the violin, and of course they said he's not qualified to say absolutely anything. I can't remember who it was who made the comment, but they said that about him, and it's a bit of a stupid attitude because, what's wrong with Mr. Menuhin or anyone else being intelligent and having views about more than one topic?
That's right, and also too, it's the forests are not just an industry province, are they? There seems to be the Australian Forest Industry Council takes itself as the sole legitimate spokes group for forests, and get really offended if anybody else wades into their territory. And of course, I suppose what Yehudi Menuhin was pointing out was that the forests have a spiritual and cultural value that goes well beyond their value as sticks of timber or chips of pulp.
Well, that's the thing, and I think that there's that also, but behind Suzuki's comments, and I think if we do treat the land with a certain amount of respect and take spirituality and meaning into the whole of the thing. Of course, it means more than just money. And, well, food. I mean, the production of food means more than just money. And you would think that to wreck one area of land for production of money for another, more so than food, is a pretty short-sighted attitude. We really have damaged a lot of the land, and to be honest, there are many constructive things going on at the moment. I suppose the argument is to whether they're enough or whether they're moving quickly enough, but I think it would have been much more constructive for the people who did criticise Suzuki's comments to to take those attitudes inboard, to acknowledge them, and to say, well, obviously something's got to be improved here. And I mean, if you criticise someone, it obviously defends you from doing anything else. So you can say, oh, well, they were just talking out of their hat. And of course, that means you don't need to do anything. You can sit back on your laurels then and say, well, they were saying the wrong thing, we're all right. And I think it's about time that those attitudes changed.
Yeah, also too, there was a comment here by Bruce Lilburn in regard to the comments that Suzuki made about the Australian fishing industry and how it seems to be a fairly mindless industry of plunder and plunder and plunder until stocks drop off. Now, I don't know much about the fishing industries of rock lobster in Western Australia and so on that were quoted, but there's an interesting one, and this is from Bruce Lilburn, where he said that in the case of scallops, catches had fallen, but not directly because of a result of heavy fishing on and even the fishermen agree that they're fallen because the scallop industry was opened up to everybody without limit, the price was good, and they flogged the living hell out of it.
Well, the inland fishing industries have certainly dropped off. I mean, you come up here and you talk to people what they were getting 40, 50 years ago, and it's just nothing. To what you get today is just absolutely nothing compared to all of that.
Right, and we also forget about the inland fishing industry, but if you listen to the market report on the 10 to 2s and thereabouts on the ABC 3AR, you still get reports of cod and so on coming in yellow belly from the Merri River and from various rivers and tributaries of the Merri, but of course these catchments were far higher before the days of salinity, Roger.
That's right.
Okay, mate, and what other good things are happening up there in the way of educational stuff with kids and people? How's your salinity display going up there?
Oh, well, in Swan Hill it's been pretty good. We've had lots of schools come in. As a little bit of an aside, they're actually judging the exhibition on Friday for the Museum of the Year. I've got no idea how that'll go. I've got mixed feelings about it, but we'll see how it goes. One interesting thing which has happened up here is that there's been a report put out on the marshes. And if you follow duck shooting at all, you'll be aware of the fact that the marshes is one of the bigger duck shooting areas in northern Victoria. And there's been a controversy raging on about these marshes. They're at the end of the Avoca River. And there's been a big argument as to whether tree death, there's been massive tree death in the marshes. There's been a lot of trees died and a lot more look like they will. And there's been a big argument as to whether it's the rise of saline water tables killing their roots off underground or whether it's ponding of water. And of course the duck shooters want the water in there in March, which is very unseasonal. Naturally, March would have been one of the driest months of the year because it followed the dry summer. And there's been quite a lot of work done on this, extensive drilling, extensive survey, and they found out that it's not due to the rise of saline water tables, it's due to ponding. And a sill that was put in the marshes to keep the water levels high some years ago, it's now proposed that this will be removed. They're looking from comment from the local community. They're getting a hell of a lot, not all of it objective. But it actually looks like in this case that the duck shooters have perhaps watched the water a little too much and not watched their vegetation anywhere near enough. So what
will be the outcome of that, Roger? Do you think they'll lower those levies on the marshes?
Well, the sill at the end, which is just a very small concrete weir, I think that will be removed. Really, if you do want sort of hands-on control over water levels in these places, I think that adjustable outlets would be the go. Removing it altogether would obviously be cheaper, but there might be merit for having ponded water in there at some stages, and so you'd sort of want an adjustable level at the outlet of the marshes. But at least it's brought it to attention of people that the wetlands are a little more than this and a little more than just that, and that some of the techniques for management might actually be perhaps a little more complex, or a little more sophisticated than they assumed.
All right, mate. Well, look, thanks a lot for that, and we'll catch up with you next week, no doubt, around about the same time.
I'm going to be in the big smoke in 2 weeks' time.
Are you? Oh, you can come in live, Roger. Haven't seen you for that bloody long. All right, mate. Well, how's the weather up there? A good fine day too?
Beautiful.
Beautiful. All right, mate. Okay, well, we'll see you soon, and we'll catch up with you and speak to you next week about more things in the Murray Valley.
See you later.
See you, mate. And Roger Jones with his weekly report. Okay, into a track and back with Peter Pruss from the Australian Conservation Foundation to talk about kangaroo farming, something that you can listen to and come in on Talkback about 15 minutes after we start yakking away. And here's another one selected by the Phenomena, Jonathan Richmond.
I walked last night, should say I wandered, and I saw the galaxies, and so I pondered how I'd love to roam there, up in the sky sometime. I saw Saturn, I saw the other planets running their pattern. It looked warm there, and I felt at home there, and I wanna roam there, up in the sky sometime. I see a little planet. Well, do you think that one is Jupiter? And frankly, as I walked last night, I spied a little satellite. And oh my baby, let's roam there too, my darling. We'll find a home there, my baby. Let's go up in the sky sometime. Baby, we could go there. We're overdue to roam there. I feel at home when I'm under the stars, and I want to roam up there sometime. Well, now I see a little planet. Do you think that one is Saturn? Well, and if we're lonely up there, we can watch them planets running their pattern. And oh my baby, let's roam there. And oh my darling, we're overdue to go. I like it down here, but I want to go up in the sky sometime. Well now, oh my darling, don't you want to go? Oh my darling, don't you want to go too? Oh now, don't you want to go up in the sky and wander? Baby, don't you want to wander like I want to? Don't you want to go up there and explore? I want to go up there to roam sometime. I'd say, oh my darling, we got to go, and oh my darling, got to go, my darling, got to go up there to roam and explore. I said, baby, that's right. I think you want to go there just like I do. When we dream, we kind of go there, but I want to really go there. That's right. I said, oh my baby, got to go, and oh my darling, got to go. It's something we're supposed to do. I think we ought to up in the sky, wander sometime.
Okay, Jonathan Richmond, and that track was Up in the Sky Sometime, the Modern Lovers. And you're on through Triple R, Eclectic Parrot, and just a couple of little quick announcements. Yes, the Save Our St Kilda Benefit Pub Aid is on Saturday the 6th of August at the Junction Oval Club Rooms, Aughty Drive, not Naughty Drive, Aughty Drive St Kilda, Aughtie. And it's got, here we go, Mark Seymour, Friends of Reptiles, Melody Lords, Brady Bunch, Lawnmower Massacre, Ton Up Pirates, Jazz, Swinging Sidewalks, Buzzard, Fungus, Swing City, Vulgar, Tammy from Manjuba Comedians, St Kilda Characters and Entities, Drinking Beer, Dancing and Stuff, and hopefully talks about penguins down there too, which are in just as big a danger, no, a whole lot bigger danger than the residents, so that should be interesting. And so that's the Save Our St Kilda benefit, and the reason we don't see Couture at the moment is she's rapidly whacking posters up for it. Get to it. It should be a really good night, and the money's raised will go go towards campaigning. Of course, these conservation groups and the smaller citizens groups and urban groups haven't got the finances of the people that they're trying to work with, and it's very difficult for them. So it's a good way to have a good time. You'd be paying a pub $8 to see a band anyway, and here we are, look at that plethora, a regular plethora of bands. I like that word. Okay, now down to something a bit more gritty. Kangaroo farming. It's an issue that's been one creeping around for many, many years. When I was in high school, an old biology teacher of mine, Norton Hobson, fronted me radically about kangaroo farming once and said, look here, McDonald, if you don't agree to kangaroo farming, you'll have no hope of making a large section of this country national park. I too objected to the idea of farming a wild animal, and for many years those words stuck in my mind. Well, in recent times, and you've heard on the Parrot, we've interviewed many people about kangaroo farming and what it means. And I think that it's opened up a debate, and it's also opened up a fundamental difference between naturalists and people in Victoria, a lot of biologists, and the Australian Conservation Foundation and people within animal liberation. We're here to talk about the Australian Conservation Foundation's view on this subject and how they come to it, and talk about it and give you a chance to ask both of us questions is Peter Preuss. G'day, Peter.
Hi.
Peter, firstly, what is the ACF policy on kangaroo farming?
Well, the ACF is opposed to kangaroo farming, totally opposed to the idea of farming any wildlife species.
I suppose the logical question you ask at that stage is, if you were living in the Siberian uplands, would you be opposed to cattle farming?
In the form that
That's
are
where
there.
they're from.
Yeah, okay, but we're throwing in a bit of a red herring there, and maybe if we go to the other extreme where you were saying we want to look for common ground, the reasons why we're looking at farming kangaroo now are because we do have a common ground in so much as we all agree that Australia faces a really bad soil degradation problem. Now, where we differ is the fact that some people romantically believe that the kangaroo is going to be a solution to that problem. Now, the Australian Conservation Foundation and a whole range of other groups, not just animal liberation, but Greenpeace, Fund for Animals, Australian Wildlife Protection Council, an organisation which I had trouble saying but work with a lot, we all agree that you can't look at kangaroo farming as a viable alternative to sheep and cattle in the hope of soil degradation going as a problem.
Okay, well, the real push for kangaroo farming in the last couple of years has come from Professor Gordon Grigg, who unfortunately we can't catch at the moment. He's out in Western New South Wales looking at this very problem at the moment. But the important thing, I suppose, that he brought up, and one thing that might help us in discussion, is he's talking about the semi-arid rangelands of New South Wales and Western Queensland. And it's in New South Wales that the minister's taken action and asked for submissions of interest in kangaroo farming. So maybe if we keep it to that area, and I suppose the way Gordon Grigg spelled out the problem was that it's an area that's been grazed now traditionally over a period of 100 years. We've lost it's free land graze, and we have farms up to several kilometres square. It's not fenced normal farming country. We have a big kangaroo population, and we have a very big sheep and cattle population out there, and at the present time about 500,000 plus kangaroos are being shot out there on a yearly basis. And his argument was that if we farm kangaroos by that same shooting harvesting technique that's going on now, but per property, then they could not only bring the sheep and cattle off, but there'd be no vested interest in sowing pasture and degrading the land. So what is there still this difficulty that we have with a wild animal? That's the problem. Now, you don't see it as a solution, or is there any other way of tackling the solution to conservation in those areas?
No, Bob, there's two sides to this argument that are married, and you can't separate them. The first one's a philosophical one. I mean, if you pick up your dictionary and you look at the word wild, you'll see words in it such as untamed, uncultivated. As soon as you start owning the animal, and as soon as you start selectively killing it, which amounts to selectively breeding it, you're manipulating the genetic pool of that animal, you can't call it wild. So straight away you have got a difficulty there in terms of wildlife conservation.
What about, well, when you bring up the business of manipulating genetic pools, how do you manipulate a genetic pool of kangaroo? If say, for instance, because kangaroo farming is something it's new, it's just being proposed now. It is going on in Europe in terms of wallabies at the moment, but as far as Australia is concerned, it's a new industry. And isn't one of the pretense put up by Gordon Grigg was that the kangaroos would have to live their full life as wild animals, that their physiology makes them absolutely incapable of being captured in any way. Within 3 minutes, they're irreparably damaged by stress, and that they'd be very hard to manipulate genetically, unlike stock that can be taken and semen taken out of them and handled handling and all this kind of stuff with kangaroos. It was just an impractical proposition that they would live their lives actually as a wild animal in their natural environment and simply end them by being shot, which is happening at the moment, and then kangaroo products would be eaten.
We've already been manipulating the kangaroo populations somewhat with the commercial harvesting of them. We've been harvesting predominantly predominantly males, and the older females, which has left behind a larger female population. The result of that,
the female population doesn't genetically alter.
But the result of that is that we have, excuse me, huge fluctuations in populations which would otherwise not be there. Now, you can genetically manipulate them in exactly the same process of selective shooting. You shoot for the bigger ones or the smaller ones if you want to eventually end up with a larger animal in your stock. And that's something that the farmers will, or the landholders will, be inclined to do when they have ownership of the animal.
But isn't the answer to that argument that come from Gordon Grigg himself in the interview he did with us? He said that the older males and the larger animals tended to give a better hide, but not as good a meat. And it was the smaller animals and the more average-sized animals that gave you, and the younger animals that gave you better meat, but not as much hide. And he argued that could be, with management, balanced out. Surely those are things that can be controlled by a strict management regime.
But the point is, as soon as you're talking about ownership, there won't be the tendency to just leave it up to the shooter as to which ones he's going to shoot and which ones he's not. The landholder will say, I want the larger ones or the bulkier ones or the slower ones or the ones with the fatter tails, etc., left behind so that they will ultimately breed up. And in the not the long term, in the fairly short term, you could have a very changed animal on your hands. You can still have a kangaroo in 50 or 100 years' time, but it will be a different animal to what we're looking at today.
Well, I don't know. I dispute that. I think for a start, it depends on how they're farmed. Now, perhaps we can get to that. The Gordon Grigg's presentation on farming was simply that what would happen is that a certain number of permits would be issued to farmers on a similar basis to now, based on the estimates of kangaroo population. That the large rangeland farms, these are farms that have, a couple of square kilometres up, where at the present time they free range their cattle and free range their sheep and go out with helicopters and stockmen and motorbikes and round them up, bring them in and blah blah. These stock would be taken off those farms, experimental kangaroo farms entirely. The kangaroo populations that move through, say, 4 or 5 adjoining farms be estimated in the same way that they're estimated now, and that a certain cull licence be given to each farm based on the populations, of course needing research. That nobody denies that we need a lot more research down that line. Now, surely you think with research and with particularly conservationists and so many eminently qualified biologists in kangaroo biology who have got a real commitment to the animal, working on them, that we could work out something to overcome these problems you're bringing up.
But you're also talking about really strict controls and all that, and that's assuming that you can have those controls.
But isn't it self-controlling to a large extent? You haven't. It's not like a cow. It can't be manipulated. Where's the difference between a cow and a kangaroo? Like what?
Well, I've already talked about that in terms of the philosophical standpoint, and you mentioned Suzuki earlier and his position on various things being very philosophical. He's one person, for example, who has talked about kangaroo farming as a very bad option, some 10 years ago when this was a seedling little issue. But that's just stressing the difference, the philosophical difference between a wild animal and the domestic animal.
What about, all right, well, let's look at, well, Kitty, you have...
Yeah, I sort of want to pick up this notion of ownership. You're talking about, well, you're going to manipulate them genetically once you start imposing ownership on them. But are you actually doing that? I mean, you're not going to be branding kangaroos in a mob. We're talking about letting them roam the way they've always roamed the country and issuing licences. So you're not really imposing that notion of ownership.
They're not being fenced and they're not being branded.
Well, the farmers that I've spoken to were talking about fencing processes, but even that aside for a moment, what any farmer would do is to try and attract them all onto his property, or as many of them as he possibly can.
Which means he grows the best bush he possibly can.
He's also going to try whatever he can to stop them from going over to another property.
No,
now, that's ownership.
But that can be restricted. Those things can be prevented.
You're also going half a dozen steps in front of yourself, surely, because isn't the idea from Gordon Grigg that first we need the research, because the mobs of kangaroos and fencing them is shown to be impractical. Even as pest control, it can't work. If it could work, people would be using it now. It's quite expensive for the graziers to have their stock competing with kangaroos. And what Gordon Grigg's idea and what our idea and the idea of many naturalists was that you had a large, wild and mobile population, and because the properties we're dealing with are so large, you can talk of them in terms of square kilometres, that they already hold a stock. They're already taking off their property. Some farmers have argued, we've had a shooter in here arguing that the shooters were making more money for the kangaroos they're taking off the land when times were bad, particularly in drought times, and what the farmers were for their stock. So the encouragement factor that you're talking about would only encourage people to revegetate, perhaps.
Well, I'll give you a classic example. I've just spent a week travelling New South Wales with Greenpeace. They put out an ad in the paper asking for any farmer who has got an idea on this issue to contact them, and we'd go out and have a look at them, whether they were pro-farming or against farming. Now, one classic case that we saw was a chap who had his land right up against the state park, and he was worried about 60 kangaroos coming onto his property. It's a small property and not typical of the sort of things that we're talking about, but the mentality is what I'm trying to get across here. He had 60 kangaroos, and he said that there was no way known that he could afford to fence that area in. Now, when we started talking kangaroo farming with him, he suddenly changed his mind, not only decided that he could afford to have a kangaroo-proof type fence, but he came up with this magic design that was actually going to funnel them in out of the actual state forest,
just
attract them on.
But to cut you, Peter, you're going from one second-hand experience with one farmer. You're avoiding the issue, aren't you? It's not. We went
through a lot of trouble to speak to a lot of farmers. That was just one case.
But wasn't the point that the decision shouldn't be made by farmers without the benefit of information? That what we should be engaging in is research from the biological community, from the scientific, but research firstly.
But control doesn't mean putting up fences to restrict the kangaroos' movement.
But you're going to have
We're talking about controlling the
amount shot.
The amount shot and how the licences are issued.
But you're
farmers
also going
can't
to
be
have
bothered putting up fences to keep their cattle in. So
No one's
why
going
should
to
they bother
fence.
putting up an even more expensive fence
we're
to
also
keep a mob of kangaroos
because
in?
the cattle aren't going to venture some distance away when they see a thunderstorm in the distance, or they're not going to venture away in the same way as kangaroos are likely to. So they will do everything they can to encourage them to be there. Now, what will need to be required is a whole range of controlling legislation or whatever to say, right, well, you can do this and you can't do that.
Wait a second.
Exactly.
Just hold it. Just for
Okay,
one,
now,
before we
exactly,
go,
I've got you agreeing on a point,
Okay,
so I'll get up
well,
with
you
on that
two
in a
can
minute.
hold that point and come back and stop. But look, the most important thing is we're talking about large areas of property. So your man with 60 kangaroos, really, to our original premise that we started on, is irrelevant. We're talking about areas many kilometres where fencing, even for cattle and sheep, is totally impractical. It's not done. There's boundary fences perhaps, but that's the absolute limit which kangaroos freely move through. And so all we're talking about is defined property only as far as a boundary fence. We're talking about broad rangelands management. We're not talking about small farms. We're not talking about a farmer buying 50 kangaroos and putting them on his place. We're not talking about people living next door to national parks who want 60 kangaroos. And now, what I want to know from you before we go on, we have it seems to be forgotten in this debate, we are losing mammal species. We've lost 18 mammal species in Australia. We've got the worst record of any continent on Earth in the last 200 years. And the places we're losing those mammal, bird and insect species are semi-arid areas. These areas that Gordon Grigg is specifically targeting, these areas are becoming horrifically degraded. It's leading in some cases to salinity, massive disvegetation. And the reason for it is that we have cattle and sheep, which are badly adapted to that land, grazing back really heavily, native vegetation that's not adapted to them, causing big erosion problems and big problems with the ecosystem. Now, if you're not going to accept kangaroo farming, which is to remove the cattle and sheep, that's the motivation behind it, off that land, how else, in the practical medium term, in the next 20 years, how else can we see cattle and sheep removed from that land?
It's very simple. You give the legislation that is there presently, which is supposed to govern the stocking rates, teeth. Now, at the moment, people are not adhering to...
You're accepting some stock on this thing, on this land. You're accepting some
Even
cattle
Gordon
and sheep.
Grigg has been quoted as saying 20 to 25% a decrease in stocking rates would be okay. It would be enough to sort of revive a lot of the areas. Now, that's not my figure. That's one that a lot of the experts are throwing around.
But surely, though, wouldn't it be far more achievable? Like, we've got a New South Wales radical Liberal government, radically right-wing Liberal government that's just deregistered or failed to go through the proclamation of 2 national parks. Now, we're not very likely to see a government throw away rural votes, particularly the way they're weighted in either Victoria, New South Wales and particularly Queensland, by doing anything about stocking rates. But wouldn't it be a very positive option to propose kangaroo farming to these farmers? Surely.
No, because you're telling them to remove their sheep and cattle, and I'll give you another quote. On that trip, a farmer simply said, great, to farm kangaroos would be a pretty good idea. I can make a quid out of that, but don't expect me to give up my sheep. Until you can cross sheep with kangaroos, I'm not giving up my sheep.
No, but you don't tell them what to do. You make it more attractive for them.
So really what you're talking about is not kangaroo farming as such. You were talking about increasing the level of commercial exploitation of kangaroos that we have at the moment.
Well, you call it kangaroo farming, but well, for instance, there's a lot of cruelty that people seem to forget within animal live, even David Suzuki, even whoever you quote, that at the present time that these cattle are being put into stock trucks, they're dying en route to ports, they're being zapped with prodders and all the rest of it, they're being tortured in sale yards, they're queued up. The suffering, the animal suffering that's going on is absolutely extraordinary, and it's worse for the semi-arid areas simply because the distances they have to travel are further. Now, surely anything that will relieve that suffering and mean that kangaroos get a quick, instant death after a perfect wildlife compared to an animal that's been genetically manipulated and forced to suffer these horrific bloody tortures just to put red meat on the plate of us and Japanese, if that could be replaced, then surely it would be a plus for animal welfare, wouldn't it?
Well, anyone who knows me knows that I'm very sympathetic with the animal liberation cause, especially on terms of cruelty. But what we're looking at with regards to the kangaroo industry is the cruelest exploitation of wildlife in the world. Now, you're talking about the...
How is it cruel to shoot a kangaroo in the head and kill it?
Because, well, how many of them are female?
But how is it... No, don't throw another question at me. How is it cruel? You're talking about cruelty. How is it cruel to shoot a kangaroo in the head and kill it?
Because
it has a
half of them
joey
being
in the pouch.
females will be carrying joeys in the pouch.
Now, isn't the normal way of a kangaroo in drought time of aborting the joey is for the milk supply to dry up and that joey to die? And don't red kangaroos go through many, many, many joeys before one survives?
Well, granted, but that's
well,
not...
isn't
that's,
it? So if you shoot...
So you're justifying cruelty with more cruelty.
No, not more cruelty.
And these are healthy animals which are going to be destroyed
well,
simply
of course,
because...
well, the cattle are healthy too. There's no comparison
But
there.
you're the one that brought up the cruelty issue, and I'm pointing out that the kangaroo industry is the cruelest exploitation of wildlife in the world.
Because
and if you look at the figures, you've got, say, 3 million kangaroos being shot every year. You break that down to a nightly process, and you're looking at something like 2,000 kangaroos that get their heads bashed every night.
Right, now, the kangaroos, now they're headshot kangaroos, aren't they, the most part? Because kangaroo ammunition is just too expensive and professional shooters
I'm talking
accurate.
about what happens to the joey. They're
right.
rarely left
so
to die.
So the joeys get bashed?
The joeys get bashed,
so
all the older ones...
So the comparison in cruelty is whether or not we have to bash the joeys in the female pouches to kill them, which sounds horrific, and the sudden death of the females as compared to what a cow has to do in sitting in a truck for 2 or 3 days, not being fed, no water, blah, 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 queuing up at an abattoirs and getting shot.
You're the one that brought up the cruelty issue. I'm saying you can't replace one extreme form of cruelty with another.
Okay, well look, listeners, 419-6744, you have your say and find out what you think about kangaroo farming, and you can give us a call now and we'll keep talking. We'll pick you up midstream in conversation, and you're on 3RRR, Eclectic Parrot, talking about kangaroos. Peter, it sounds like the arguments are well worked out. It sounds like there's a total and absolute opposition from the ACF towards kangaroo farming. But I was surprised at how many people hadn't actually met Gordon Grigg and sat down with him. The people I spoke to, Ian Penner was one. Have you met Gordon Grigg?
I've met him. Whether he remembers that, I don't know.
Right. Is there a chance of people working better? If kangaroo farming is going to become reality like New South Wales, is there a chance of people working closer together?
Sorry, could you run that by me?
Is there a chance of people working closer together to get together to iron out some of these difficulties? Or
For sure. I mean, as I said before, the common ground that we do have here, and it's one of the major concerns of the ACF, is the extent of land degradation.
All right, okay. Well, look, we've got a couple of calls coming up. We'll go into a little bit of a track. And, first we'll take one. Hello, you're online now.
Hi. I was going to talk about the cruelty thing. I did a honours thesis doing fiendish things to rats, and I'm actually not really in favour of that sort of thing, and I had to think about whether we're entitled to do anything at all that interferes with other animals' life processes, etc. And I sort of decided that typically humans are omnivores, and in the life, or in sort of in their biological